right, welcome back, and delighted to have with us today Tevi Troy is the senior fellow there at the Ronald Reagan Institute, also a former deputy secretary of the Health and Human Services and the senior White House aide. He's authored 5 books on the presidency, including the most recent one, The Power and the Money: the epic clash between commanders-in-chief and titans of industry. And there's a picture of the cover of the book on the screen. He does have a website, TeviTroy.org, and there's a picture of that landing site. Mr. Troy, good to see you again, friend. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Great picture, and I always appreciate being on your show.
Thank you, thank you. Got a short one today. Sorry about that. How are Americans going to be impacted if the president's proposal to eliminate income tax on those who are earning less than $150,000?
Yeah, I'm always for tax cuts, but I get a little wary of this one. All these economic studies have shown that there's just not enough 1%ers, not enough billionaires to pay for all the massive federal spending. And so we need to think carefully about that. When I was in the Bush administration and we took literally millions of people off the rolls by upping the deductions, we actually reduced the tax base, and it makes it very hard to put in controls on spending in the future. If the vast majority of Americans don't pay any taxes, then they're not going to care about spending issues or debt or deficits. And so psychologically, I worry about the approach.
Are we creating unnecessary classifications?
I mean, all the time. I mean, the federal government does nothing but create unnecessary classifications, whether it's racial or economic or nationalistic. So, yeah, I'm not for these classifications. But I just worry about this whole idea that it's a country where only the very wealthy pay taxes and everybody else doesn't. And then all of the incentives are to derive more and more spending.
The president campaigned on not taxing Social Security. Is that ever going to see the light of day?
I mean, we got a real financial problem in this country. We're $37 trillion in debt. The entitlements are going to lead to even more debt, a debt explosion in the years ahead. At some point, we're going to have to either pay back what we're borrowing or at least get it on a more manageable trajectory. So all these things that sound nice, like not paying taxes on Social Security, they actually compound the problem. And what I would like to see is a reduction in spending. We have plenty of revenue. We don't need more revenues. What we need are spending to be in line with the revenue that we bring in.
It appears to me what we're seeing with DOGE is a lot of unnecessary spending or crazy spending or just fraud, I guess you could say. If we just stop that, wouldn't that be a huge savings?
I mean, it's a huge savings, but it's also a drop in the bucket. I mean, the real game is in the entitlements. But yeah, I'm all for dropping unnecessary spending. I'm all for getting rid of transgender comic books and all the stuff that USAID is putting out there. I'm all for getting rid of grants to left-wing organizations. There's so much waste in there. There's so much abuse that I really think we need to do some real improvements in the way we go about this.
Do you think a balanced budget's in the future?
Not in the near future, but at some point we got to get to it. Yeah, sure.
What do you think of his actions yesterday to start dismantling the Department of Education?
Look, the Department of Education, there's a clear correlation between, since it existed, we've had spending go up and up and up. And at the same time, test scores go down and down and down. At some point, you have to say, maybe this is not the best way of going about it. I want to see education done more at the local level. You know, you see all these people who are defending Department of Education. They have these completely contradictory arguments. They say, well, you know, it's all education is just at the local level anyway. Well, and I say, fine, why do you need the federal spending? And they say, but this is essential to poor and disabled workers and poor and disabled students who are the vast majority of students. It can't be that everybody's poor and everybody's disabled. So I think the arguments for it are completely contradictory. I think we would be better off having more education done at the local level. And all the Department of Education does for all its grants and its money is it requires local schools to hire more administrators to deal with all of their various requirements. And by doing that, you just increase the costs at local schools. You have them paying more and more for administrators rather than teachers. And as we're seeing, the results are getting worse and worse.
All right. So given the simpleness of it, the ROI is 0. So in the meantime, he is dismantling it, but he can't eliminate it. That has to come from Congress. You think that'll happen?
Probably not in the near future. I mean, the again, the Department of Education is something that Republicans have been talking about getting rid of since the Reagan years, when it was shortly after it was created. So there's a lot of unhappiness with the Department of Education. It pretty quickly became apparent that it was a boondoggle to the teachers' unions, and again, just led to more and more spending and worse results. Uh, so I'm glad they're taking steps to see what they can do about it, but I don't see Congress in the near future taking a vote to eliminate something that has the nice name of the Department of Education, even if it doesn't get good results.
So, what's your take of the president's performance so far? It's only been not quite 90 days.
Well, typically with Trump, it's mixed. There are going to be some things you like, and there's going to be some things you don't like. The energy he brings to the executive is really astounding. I mean, when I worked in the Bush White House, everything was so very regimented. The president did something at 9 o'clock. He did something at 9:30. With Trump, who knows what's going to happen next? He's making a phone call. He's meeting with somebody. People just come into. I've heard stories even from this morning of people who show up in Washington. They say, "Hey, can I meet with the president?" They say, "Sure, we'll fit you in." That would never have happened in previous administrations. So he's doing a lot of stuff. Some of the things I certainly like the anti-woke, anti-DEI stuff, getting rid of pro-Hamas people who are here on visas, who are abusing the immigration process, I think is also a good thing. The strong support for Israel, something I support. Doing something about the Department of Education, doing something about wasteful spending. I like all those things. I don't necessarily like going after law firms that are not on his side with executive actions. That's like a bill of attainder, to my mind. And I'd like to see more support for Ukraine, because my foreign policy is like my tennis rooting, root against the Russians. So that's where I stand on these things.
What do you think how the Ukraine-Russia negotiations are going?
It's hard to say because it gets put through the press, and you don't really see honestly what's going on. I would obviously love to see an end to the war, but an end to the war with Russia back in its own territory, and also Russia with no more territorial designs on Ukraine. So I don't necessarily know that that's going to happen if that's where they stop today. But also, there is a lot of blood, there is a lot of slaughter, as President Trump has said. So I want to see it end, but I want to see a good result that sees the Russians chastened and no longer engaging in these kinds of shenanigans.
What do you think the president's plan to possibly take over the energy or the nuclear plants in Ukraine?
Uh, there's I think that's one of these very preliminary ideas that he puts out there, and I think it's too soon to tell. There's a famous story that when Kissinger met with Chu Enlai in China in the early 1970s, he said, "What do you think is the impact of the French Revolution?" And that's what Chu Enlai said. Too soon to tell. So let's wait and see.
Okay. He's also worked pretty hard to release not only the JFK files, the Martin Luther King files, and others. What's the point of that? I'm surprised that none of that hasn't made headlines since they've been released.
Yeah, I'm all for releasing those files. This stuff is 50, 60 years old, and it's just to protect certain people's reputations who work in the agencies. The one thing I was uncomfortable with is they didn't do enough redactions in that the Social Security numbers of some people who are still alive, I mean, they're pretty old, but they're still alive, were in there, and that shouldn't happen. I think that's just a mistake, and hopefully they can correct that.
What's your thoughts about RFK Jr. and his agenda?
He's been relatively quiet since he's gotten in there, so it's hard to say. I'm all for making America healthy. I think that's great. I do think we need to do stuff about bird flu. I think long term, the costs of our health systems, our health plans are a real problem. I'd like to see some work towards value-driven healthcare. I think we're on the cusp of a biomedical revolution. I just wrote about this in Commentary magazine, and I think the unremitting hostility against the pharmaceutical industry makes it harder to get there. So I think there's a lot to do on the health front, and I'm hopeful that he will take the steps in the right direction.
Well, a lot going on.
Yeah.
I like you, sometimes your head is spinning because there's so much going on. But do you think the economy is heading in the right direction?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Another one of those too soon to tell things. I think there have been some worrisome numbers on consumer confidence. I did like to see that some of the inflationary prices of eggs, for example, going down a little bit. So it's a mixed story. We're not going to know this quarter necessarily, but I'm hopeful that they can get things turned around. A guy who I trust on the markets said that he thinks the S&P will be at 6,600 the end of the year. That would be a good sign. I'd like to see that.
Last question quickly. We're also hoping it brings the cost of energy down. I mean, that would be the one thing that would improve a lot of things. Why isn't that happening faster?
Well, I mean, the Biden administration was really, truly awful on this. They shut down the Keystone Pipeline. They basically try to make it as hard as possible to produce energy in America, to produce domestic energy, while they were trying to make it easier to do it abroad, where it's less clean and where the money is going to our enemies. So I thought that was very unwise. And it takes time to unwind that. But yes, fostering domestic production of energy is one of the best things we can do, not only for our national security, but also to goose the economy and make sure that prices are cheaper for us here at home.
Right. Hey, thanks for your time. Sorry it wasn't longer. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, check out his book. I think you'll find it to be a fascinating read, The Power and the Money. Right there is a picture of the cover of the book, Tevi Troy, and then that is also his website, tevitroy.org. Thank you, friend. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.